One of the core themes in Lies of P is the question of what makes someone or something a human. Is having a soul enough, or do you also need the awareness of being alive and the memories of a life well lived? Join me for a discussion about humanity and the paradox of an honest lie as we take a look at these themes as they're presented in Lies of P. Now, before we get started, just so we're all on the same page, I'm in the camp of calling our protagonist Pinocchio, as he is most often referred to as the puppet of Jepetto. And Geppetto's puppet from the original novel is of course named Pinocchio, so that is how I've always referred to him as. The first time you are prompted to lie is right before you approach Hotel Krat. Sophia communicates to you telepathically that you won't be granted access to the hotel unless you lie, and this sets the stage to follow that in order to blend in as a surviving human, we're going to need to lie.
The hotel security excludes puppets like you, so you'll have to lie to get inside. You're a special puppet after all.
And due to the restrictions of the Grand Covenant, the set of rules by which all puppets are bound by, it is impossible for a puppet to lie. So we are shown here very early on into the story that our Pinocchio is no ordinary puppet.
Grand Covenant's fourth law. A puppet cannot lie.
Your lies are a rare ability. You're able to choose your own path, unbound by anything.
Even though a lie is as straightforward as not telling the truth, the lies in Lies of P aren't that simple, because some of these lies aren't necessarily untrue. Let's take a look at the question posed by the weeping woman at the window in Elysian Boulevard. She tells you that her family took her baby Elena away, and she begs you to bring her back so that she can see her face one more time before she goes completely blind from the petrification disease. When you find this missing Elena, you see that she's a puppet, and even Gemini seems a little confused by this revelation.
What do we do? Just give her that baby puppet?
When you return the puppet baby, the woman asks you what you think, and you have the option to lie and tell her that it's a cute baby, or you can tell her the truth, that it's a puppet.
That's right, kind one.
Lying is, of course, the kind response and the one that rewards you with your first record. Even though at this point in the story this lie is an untrue statement, we find out later on that it may have actually been true. It's revealed further into the story that this Ergo we've been collecting was once a living person.
Ergo reached out, wanting someone to hear it was once human.
It's their immortalized and tangible soul, their memories and their lifespan all distilled into this blue rock. Ergo is also what they use to power puppets, meaning that there is a very real possibility that the baby puppet Elena actually once was a real baby and contained a baby's ergo, which means that this lie we told turns out to actually have been true. Let's take a look at another such instance that happens with Julian the Gentleman. You meet Julian in Rosa Isabel Street, and he asks if you can retrieve his dead wife's belongings so that he has something to remember her by. When you find his wife Melody's body, Gemini is stunned to see that she's actually a puppet.
It's just a puppet? What on earth is going on?
Taking her ring and returning it to a heartbroken Julian, he asks you if you've ever heard of a human and a puppet in love. You have the option to lie and tell him that she left a message saying she loves him, even though there was no such message when you found her body. But if you return to this spot in the last chapter of the game, Melody's body is now hunched over, revealing that she did indeed leave him a message saying that she loves him, which means that for a second time, we now have told a lie that ended up being the truth. This scenario of telling a lie that is technically the truth happens a couple more times. When Belle asks what has become of her partner Atkinson, you can tell her the truth and say that he's become a monster, or you can lie and say that he was killed in action fighting a puppet. But if you killed Atkinson in the train car to end his suffering, then he truthfully was killed in action fighting a puppet. And during the last interaction with Arlecchino, he asks you what you are, a puppet or a human.
Finally! You understand! Yes, we are human.
If you lie and say human, he is overjoyed that someone else gets it. He reiterates the revelation that we've already found out by this point, that puppets are indeed partly human because they contain the ergo of a human soul. In the school of philosophy and logic, there is a conundrum called the liar's paradox. This is a scenario in which a statement that claims to be false must actually be true in order for the statement to be false, which would then make the false statement true, and so on. There's a specific version of the liar's paradox called the Pinocchio Paradox. This occurs when Pinocchio says, "My nose grows now." But if Pinocchio's nose only grows when he's lying, then his nose couldn't grow if he's telling the truth about his nose currently growing, thus the paradox. The Pinocchio Paradox was proposed in 2001 when a logician and philosopher asked his children to invent their own version of the liar's paradox. And the name of the 11-year-old girl who created this scenario? Veronique. I think that our Veronique from the DLC might have actually been a fun little Easter egg inspired by her, just a tiny nod to her namesake. Although the lies that we've discussed may not fall exactly into the Pinocchio paradox, they certainly are a paradox of their own because, as we've seen, it's not always as simple as a true or false statement. Even though you're rewarded with an increase in humanity when you lie, there are a few different scenarios in which telling the truth is the kinder and objectively more moral option. One of these instances is when Paul and Dina asks you if you've ever seen a puppet and a human fall in love, and you have the option to lie and say no, or you can tell the truth and show him Melody's wedding ring. So even though it's beneficial for Pinocchio to lie because it grants him humanity, refraining from doing so in this moment illustrates his ability to be able to discern when and when not to lie if someone's feelings are on the line. But this time, the game actually rewards you for telling the truth. After the interaction, you'll get the message that your ergo is whispering, and this is an example of how kindness is an essential part of humanity. Telling the truth is also the moral option when Vanini asks if you can understand Romeo's recorded message. There were a couple more lies that I've found to have very curious outcomes. One of which is when you meet the imposter Alidoro at the top of the cathedral. He asks you where he can go to find a safe haven, and you can tell him the truth and send him to Hotel Krot, or you can lie and send him to Vanini Works. If you lie to him, you'll get the message that your ergo is whispering, meaning you've gained some humanity for possibly sending him into danger.
Honor and trust are everything to this hound. You've insulted me to the core. I'll never forgive you.
But if you tell the truth, which is the kinder option, you don't get any humanity. And at first, this seems odd that your ergo would be reacting to you sending a seemingly innocent person into danger, because in this chapter of the story, we wouldn't possibly know that this man is actually Parrot, the murdering imposter who killed Alidoro and stole his disguise. So I think the fact that the game rewards you for lying to him and putting him in harm's way is a little hint early on that he may not be a person worth saving. This may even be an example of Pinocchio's ergo reacting to a situation we humans would call a gut feeling or an instinct. Another odd scenario is when you first talk to Simon right after defeating Victor. He asks you what it is you think that the alchemists are creating.
I have to admit some surprise. I didn't expect you to be as rational as we are. I'm impressed. Even if it's a lie.
If you select Hope of a Cure, Simon will be very impressed with you, even though he acknowledges you're telling him a lie. And at the end of his dialogue, you'll receive a message that your springs are reacting. But if you select Monsters, he'll say that you're short-sighted, just like your father, and at the end of the interaction, you don't gain any humanity. This is a strange outcome because on the surface, choosing the lie is exactly what Simon wants to hear. He says that you're open-minded, and he even apologizes. You gain humanity from making this terrible person happy. But if you take a moral stand and call out his super insane villain plot of turning people into monsters, you're not rewarded with any humanity. I think this outcome is meant to be an illustration of Pinocchio's intelligence and awareness as to having figured out what is actually going on. He's not lying to Simon because it's what he wants to hear. He's illustrating that he now knows the alchemists have been deceiving everyone around them about a cure this entire time. Being able to tell a lie is one thing, but figuring out someone else's lie is a testament to perception, awareness, and intelligence. While I think there is a lot of nuance and intent behind the lies in the base game, the lies and choices in the DLC were not as complex, as they didn't present any of these paradoxical situations, but they did illustrate another crucial aspect of humanity, which is empathy. There were two storylines in particular that really drove this point home. One was Goddard's and the other was Alexander's. Goddard was once a high-ranking alchemist, and we know that high-ranking alchemists were the ones that were granted access to the most inner circles of the organization. They even had tokens allowing them passage throughout the Ark Abbey. Goddard was an artist, presumably the same artist that provided all of the dissection charts and illustrations made from the victims in the Zelator laboratory. And Goddard's office is right in view of the floor where the alchemists were carrying out the most vile of human experiments. So I found it very interesting that the option to lie to Goddard is the good outcome, and it's the only way you can complete her quest, because if you tell her the truth, that the canvas is blank, you get locked out of finishing this. But I didn't really want to show Goddard any kindness or understanding. She didn't show any kind of repentance for her actions, and for all we know, had she not been blinded, she might be still engaged in these awful experiments in the Zelator laboratory. But when you lie to her, even if it's out of pity, your humanity is increased. In the next storyline involving another former alchemist, we find out that Alexander Goodman experimented on a countless number of victims with his Mindkeeper machine, and like Goddard, he also doesn't seem to have any remorse about his actions. He's more upset about being a floating brain in a vat than he is about what he's done to the multiple people he simply calls experiments. But the kinder option is to disconnect him when he asks you to, so that he can die peacefully. And again, the game rewards you with granting you humanity. By Pinocchio choosing kindness rather than revenge, it's an expression of his empathy, a very human quality. And empathy is utilized by those that have enough emotional maturity to understand that being kind doesn't need to come with strings attached. Now that we've discussed the decision-making aspects of humanity, there is still the question of what makes someone or something human. And this brings us to Ergo. We learned from Simon and Sophia that all Ergo was once human. It's the crystallized essence of a person's soul, their memories, their lifespan. And this Ergo is created after a person dies from the petrification disease. So when the workshop technicians took this Ergo, not knowing that it was dead people's souls, and put it inside puppets to power them, sometimes a dead person's Ergo would start to awaken. They called this phenomenon an awakened ego, and this is when a puppet starts to express itself as a fully aware individual and even identify as the previous owner of its Ergo.
You're becoming something more than a puppet. Almost human.
And this is what Jepetto is trying to force to happen with Carlo's Ergo, which is contained inside Pinocchio's pea organ. If Pinocchio could just gain enough humanity, then maybe Carlo's ego would awaken, and the grieving father could finally bring his son back to life. Because to Jepetto, Pinocchio isn't human. He's just the temporary puppet vessel that is carrying his son's soul.
In my own way, I grew to love you. After all, you're the puppet who would bring my son back to life.
Carlo's Ergo, even though it's not awakened, is the only thing that matters to him. It isn't until that last fight where he intervenes to save Carlo's heart that Jepetto finally realizes that this is indeed his son. Though he doesn't have the same memories and experiences as Carlo, to Pinocchio, Jepetto is still very much his father. He's never known otherwise. Jepetto died in the arms of the son that he didn't get to know, because he was so blinded by his determination to bring Carlo back just as he was. Jepetto's limited definition of humanity caused so much pain and destruction, and ultimately cost him his own life. The game presents one more puzzle for us to solve in the discussion of humanity, and that is the carcass monsters. The carcass monsters were a result of the alchemist's experiments to force humanity to evolve into its next stage, but obviously the results were not what they had in mind. So we have these poor people, these transformed, mutated beings that still have their souls, but they show little to no awareness of their existence. Would they still be considered human at this point? The game actually answers this question for us. There are 3 different amulets that affect the level of damage you can inflict on enemies. 1 against puppets, 1 against humans, and 1 against carcass monsters. So while these poor people are still breathing and alive, and they still retain their souls, which they leave behind as Ergo when they die, this transformation no longer qualifies them as being human anymore. The definition of humanity has now changed to be something different. The French philosopher René Descartes famously said, "Cogito ergo sum." I think, therefore I am. Although I'm not entirely certain what the developer's inspiration was behind the naming of Ergo, it's my headcanon that it's a callback to this famous saying. And in Lies of P, it's the awareness of being alive that makes someone human. It is very much, I think, therefore I am.
We may be trapped by Ergo, but we live, we think, we love, we hate.
But Pinocchio isn't fully human, and he's not fully puppet either. He's this new version of humanity that Paracelsus finally recognizes in him at the end.
I think we have a new brother. A new type of humanity, so to speak.
In the next installment of Lies of P, I have a prediction that we are going to move on from this discussion of what makes us human, what gives us humanity, and we're going to see the downfalls of God-like beings. We are going to find out that being human is preferable to being a god for some horrible reasons, I am sure. So that is just my little theory about what we have coming down the line, but I am very, very excited to see where this story takes us and continues to unfold. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and I'd love to hear your comments on this subject as well. And please stay tuned for more videos on my channel where I talk about different things in gaming that really stand out to me and what really makes some games just above and beyond the rest. So yes, thanks again, and I'll see you later.